lending institutions and banks just start offering the same services that they offer to men to women, they'll unlock some $700 billion in additional revenues every year by doing nothing, by spending zero money, just by quality in offering services. Women will take up those services, whether they're wealth management or loans, and unlock so much more value. For small loans, also, women are forced to get an NOC, which is just giving undue power to your spouse or some family member. Like, I have a very good relationship with my father, but let's say हमारी कुछ लड़ाई वड़ाई हुई होती है, वो मेरा home loan रुकवा देते हैं. Why should that be the case at all? And those biases are very common.
हेलो पीपल, वेलकम टू येट अनदर एपिसोड ऑफ डिस्कवर विद सिंह। आज हमारे साथ हैं मिस नेहा जुनेजा। अ वेरी वार्म वेलकम फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल मैम, एंड इफ यू कुड इंट्रोड्यूस योरसेल्फ टू द ऑडियंस एज वेल।
Thank you for having me, on the show. So I have been an entrepreneur right back since 2008. उस time startups इतने cool नहीं थे, but हमने फिर भी एक cool startup किया था. So we were right out of business school, four of us, and we founded a venture which was operating in the stock market space. So it helped retail investors see futures and options or derivatives prices online for free. And that venture had a quick kind of exit and termination as well subsequently, because financial crisis happened, and we still ended up making a reasonable amount of money just running that venture for a small period of time. एंड बट
राइट।
हमने रियलाइज़ किया कि उस बहुत ही शॉर्ट लिव वेंचर में दैट हमने शायद लोगों का ज़्यादा नुकसान कराया और फ़ायदा कम, बिकॉज मोस्ट पीपल हु यूज्ड that information actually and traded in the stock markets. That's the nature of especially these complex instruments
एब्सोल्युटली।
like derivatives, lose money. And then we subsequently decided that we'll now the next venture would be a more win-win venture, and surprisingly, unsurprisingly, landed up on the problem of how people cook in India. It just so happens that men cook a lot less than women in India, so it also became a problem of working with women. And
राइट।
we saw that globally also, roughly between a third to half of the world still cooks on very basic firewood type or firewood derivatives fuels like agricultural waste, gobar, dry cow dung, your fuel wood, and of course, agricultural waste as well. And it's a very dangerous way of cooking. It's also a very old way of cooking. Like, people don't realize that एक घंटा मट्टी के चूल्हे के साथ बैठना खाना बनाने के लिए is equivalent lung damage to smoking 10 cigarettes.
ओह।
And we expose our family, like India exposes most of its family members to that kind of health harm day in and day out. And it's a big environmental challenge also. Roughly जितना carbon emissions airline industry करती है एक साल में, उतना उससे थोड़ा ज़्यादा carbon emissions happen because of cooking on मट्टी का चूल्हा, or just cooking in general. So it's a big problem, and we looked at a variety of solutions and kind of realized that the solution that we can actually execute and that will have traction will have to be a very low cost solution, because the fundamental reason why people cook like this is poverty. Poverty leads to just so many other, or just low incomes lead to so many other problems, including this one. So it took us some time to design an efficient clean burning stove, which is not very challenging but also very challenging. Like, आज के टाइम में हम मार्स पे जा रहे हैं, तो चूल्हा बनाना एक like efficient wood burning stove doesn't seem very challenging, but surprisingly it is quite a technical challenge as well. And we made such stoves. We started selling them. We eventually set up a whole supply chain, raised venture capital, gave a successful exit to our investors as well, and completed that whole cycle over 12 years. 12 साल एक लंबा टाइम होता है, एंड उन 12 साल में हमने सबसे ज़्यादा काम किया विद रूरल women, because the product is for rural households, and like I said, men cook less, so cooking is a gendered activity. And one channel, a distribution channel or awareness creation channel that we found was very effective was women microfinance groups. Groups like the whole Grameen Bank movement or thereabouts. and came to this very strong conviction that this is a very great borrower class. It's a very disciplined borrower category, very impactful, purposeful, and disciplined. And now India P2P is an attempt to unlock more capital for this already very established borrower category. So that's where the story is right now.
ग्रेट ग्रेट एंड जब आप ये वेंचर शुरू कर रहे थे मतलब आई कैन फिगर आउट दैट यू हैड अ वेरी एंटरप्रेन्योरियल आउटलुक सिंस द स्टार्ट एंड लेकिन starting this venture when you were looking out for problems was there always a sense of purpose attached with the lens of looking at what venture you want to create or was it just like ऐसा हो गया कि मतलब it became a social enterprise as well.
So it we were looking at problems whether, and we were looking at commercial problems because actually running a social venture is a lot harder because
Hmm.
capital for experimentation is even harder to get. What happens is that living in our parts of the world, our day to day basis, पे you train yourself to unsee things. You will unsee
Hmm.
that pothole on the road. You will, because अगर आप वो छोटी छोटी चीजों पे फोकस करना शुरू कर देंगे तो आपका मतलब आप कुछ कर ही नहीं पाएंगे. ऐसा हो जाता
Right.
है. And we went on this little bit of a cathartic journey to start seeing things. And I am a little bit ashamed of this fact. मतलब I'm born, brought up, I've worked all my life in India. And until the age of about 23, I had seen people cook on matti ka chulas, but never thought of it as a problem.
Hmm.
I never thought of it as something that needed to change. And I mean, because my parents had transferable jobs, kind of went all across the country, it was everywhere,
Hmm.
but never saw this as a problem. But the moment you start seeing this as a problem, it's such a large problem that it was also a large business opportunity. And of course, needless to say, it's impactful,
Hmm.
but the mission was more business than like the intention was more sustainable business than impact.
Right. Understood. एंड इन द टेड टॉक यू गेव उसमें भी आप बात कर रहे थे कि इनिशियली बीइंग अ फाउंडर फॉर अ स्टार्टअप जो आपने प्रॉब्लम फर्स्ट हैंड नहीं फेस करी है वो थोड़ा सा टेक्निकल हो जाता है कि आपको अंडरस्टैंड करना पर्सपेक्टिव
Mm.
आपके एंड यूजर का सो हाउ डू यू थिंक इम्पॉर्टेंट या हाउ सिग्निफिकेंट वाज दैट कि आपने वो प्रॉब्लम खुद फेस नहीं करी थी एंड वो आपको समझने की पूरी जर्नी पे जाना पड़ा एंड अगर हम उसको कंटेम्प्रेरी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखें तो आज के जो यंग या जो नए फाउंडर्स हैं वो जब एक ऐसी जर्नी पे निकल रहे हैं कि अगर उन्होंने प्रॉब्लम नहीं फेस करी है तो फिर उसको हाउ शुड दे फॉर्मुलेट देयर वे थ्रू दैट.
So it becomes very tricky to actually, जैसे अगर आप cook stoves का design देखें, so when we started out, these thought of it as a technical problem कि एक efficient firewood या biomass burning चूल्हा बनाना है. That was a technical problem. We did not see it in the context of the user because we had not lived like the user. The user didn't care so much about कि efficiency 30% है या 32% है. नहीं फ़र्क पड़ता. The user cares कि कितनी मतलब वो खाना तो नहीं जलाएगा या ज़रूरत से ज़्यादा जल्दी तो नहीं पका देगा या ज़्यादा स्लो तो नहीं होगा या कितना लकड़ी अगर कम लग रही है तो लकड़ी कलेक्ट करने में टाइम कम लगेगा. Those kinds of things. And it took us quite a bit of learning to. It was I mean, quite a kind of longish learning curve for us to understand all of those things. So and if I think back about it, like we were able to overcome our lack of knowledge, first-hand knowledge. First-hand knowledge is very powerful, like first-hand knowledge. But it is also very difficult to go and gain first-hand knowledge. हमने अपने घर में चूल्हा यूज करना शुरू कर दिया, वो सब किया. But even then, आपका घर आपके कस्टमर के घर जैसा नहीं है. आपके सर्कमस्टांसेस आपके हम जाकर के लोग जैसे गाँव में लोग लकड़ी या काऊ डंग ड्राई करके इकट्ठा करके ड्राई करते हैं. हम शमशान घाट जाके लकड़ी खरीद रहे थे. We were not engaged in the actual fire fuel collection practices that most people undertake. And then the Shamshan Ghat got very suspicious that why are you buying firewood from us weekly?
राइट.
What are you guys up to? So that also kind of started happening. But Naturally. So, but one of my suggestions is that if you are in a situation like this, you must do very quick testing. So, what we started doing, and which is,
Mm,
if we had not done that, the venture would not have, scaled at all. We started creating small batches of stove designs and started putting them out in, rural markets, like किसी दुकान पर या किसी वैसे ही
mm,
कुछ ठेला type पर, and started seeing when people were willing to pay for it. Like the proof of sale is a sale. Sales is the proof of sale. There is no other
right.
evidence कि ये चीज़ बिकेगी until आप उसको बेच के नहीं देखते हैं. So the moment somebody would pull out cash to pay for that stove, we knew that yes, this product, this particular design will work. We would return that cash because these were, like workshop made stoves and not factory
Mm,
made proper stoves.
mm,
We would do that, but that we repeated that for over 11 proper different designs. We kind of
mm,
kept doing it till we felt confident that yes, abhi the right design is out. And and if there was another startup in that situation, I would say that any investor supporter should support that part of the journey, the quick
mm,
experimentation journey, because most
right.
investors and others like to come after, जब ये जर्नी खत्म हो जाती है, बट सबसे ज़्यादा आपको सपोर्ट एंड ड्यूरिंग दिस जर्नी चाहिए होता है।
जब आप प्री रेवेन्यू हो।
हाँ, जब आप प्रोडक्ट बना रहे हैं,
हाँ।
या देन इट इज़ अ then it is a very different, the world changes kind of, so
राइट, राइट। सो इस जर्नी के दौरान मैम, व्हेन वाज द इंडिया P2P आइडिया फर्स्ट दैट इट स्टक योर माइंड एंड दैट यू थॉट कि अब मतलब यू वर केटरिंग टू द सिमिलर मार्केट, सो आई एम अज्यूमिंग कि आपको उस एक्सपीरियंस से ये एक नई प्रॉब्लम भी फिगर आउट की होगी आपने कि ये भी एक प्रॉब्लम है। तो वो जर्नीज दोनों कैसे एक साथ चल रही थी, और देन हाउ डिड यू डिसाइड टू मूव ऑन विद द प्रॉब्लम दैट इंडिया P2P is solving?
so yeah, what we saw was that Greenway में चूल्हे बेचने के लिए we were working with women's groups, and these groups ended up were a part or were created by some microfinance company which was operating in the region.
Hmm.
एंड माइक्रो फाइनेंस बहुत बड़ा है, जब आप जैसे इन द पब्लिक और इन द वेंचर कैपिटल कम्युनिटी और जनरली इन द सिटीज वी डोंट अंडरस्टैंड माइक्रो फाइनेंस all that well, but it's a beautiful large economic social movement that has been happening for many years now. I'll just take a
Hmm.
minute to kind of go back a little bit in microfinance. The genesis of microfinance is small experiments that NABARD, not small, actually large experiments
Hmm.
that NABARD did, happened in other parts of the world. This form of microfinance जिसमें आप लोगों को लोन दे सकते हैं was kind of started or kind of promoted in the kind of most aggressive kind of most prominent way by Mohammed Yunus of Bangladesh. He's an economist who
Okay.
subsequently went on to win the Nobel Prize for his work in microfinance as well.
Right.
And he came up with this model, which is now called the Grameen Bank model, which is Grameen
Hmm.
Bank is his organization in Bangladesh. ग्रामीण बैंक मॉडल में थीसिस यही था उनका 70s में शुरू करते हुए, दैट यू इनहेरेंटली नो दैट रूरल women आर वेरी savvy finance or money operators. They are very good at savings,
Hmm.
they're very good at growing their capital, and they're very good at the basic math of doing household budgeting or thereabouts, as or business budgeting also for that matter.
Right.
But there is no way to underwrite this borrower. There wasn't a way to underwrite this borrower in the 70s, 80s, because borrower का कोई
Hmm.
सिबिल स्कोर नहीं था, कोई कोलैटरल नहीं दे सकते थे, that kind of a thing.
बिल्कुल।
So, like, how do you reduce the risk of lending at scale to such borrowers? And this is the Grameen
Hmm.
Bank model, where a group of women are organized as a joint liability or a self-help group, more loosely put. सेल्फ ग्रुप का मतलब यही है कि अगर 5 लेडीज़ हैं ग्रुप में, उसमें एक लोन लेती है, and if she has trouble repaying, the other 4 become responsible for that loan repayment.
Right.
So they are kind of co-guarantors to the loan, and they will also not get a fresh loan until this loan is fully paid off and thereabouts. And further, such groups are organized as a center. So if a group decides to go rogue for some reason, that one lady takes a loan, they split it 5 ways, and then decide to party with it. To
Hmm.
prevent that from
Hmm.
happening, further groups are organized as centers. So the entire center is impacted, no fresh disbursements or whatever the level of impact one may
Oh.
decide. And further, such centers are organized as federations. And this is 100% women, or at least 95, 96% women only, who kind of
Right.
vouch for each other, also support each other. And it's a very strong peer pressure plus stress trust structure.
Hmm.
और आज की डेट में India has about 13 crore women who are a part of between like 10 to 13 crore women which are a part of this sort of a structure, which is
Oh, nice.
roughly अगर 24 करोड़ household या 26 करोड़ households है इंडिया में, that's a huge number. That's a
Hmm.
huge number. And over the years, there have been very strong regulations in microfinance. I'm giving you a slightly long story here. RBI regulated the sector after a little bit of, wild, wild west type of things that happened early on.
Hmm.
And since it's been regulated, increasingly, or almost 90% of microfinance borrowers also have a CIBIL score.
Right.
So it's very high credibility borrowers. But the problem we saw was that in spite of paying relatively high interest rates, like good interest rates, if you want to lend to a microfinance borrowers,
Hmm.
very low default rates. In fact, lower than loan against property rates or a bunch of other categories out there. This segment is still credit starved. Like most of the jitna, like there is more demand which is not being serviced,
Hmm.
and one of the reasons it is not being serviced is because this kind of inefficiency in the capital supply chain, and the fact that individuals like you and me were not able to, participate in lending to these high quality borrowers directly until India P2P. इंडिया P2P का वो आइडिया तो बहुत टाइम से था कि और क्या किया जा सकता है टू काइंड ऑफ गेट मोर कैपिटल इन दिस वेरी काइंड ऑफ अट्रैक्टिव एसेट क्लास एज वन में पुट इट.
Hmm.
But it was you were able to formalize India P2P when RBI came out with these P2P lending guidelines, which allow technology platforms to intermediate between borrowers and lenders in 2018 or thereabouts.
Hmm. When even I was trying to understand the problem, I got to know that this is you're always referring to it as a like one of the best repairs that women are.
And
And I wanted to understand this aspect more deeply कि हम किन किन parameters को analyze करके ये deduce कर रहे हैं कि मतलब what parameters have been kept in mind कि जब हम बात करें कि women entrepreneurs as a asset class या rural women जिनको हम lend कर रहे हैं are one of the best. So supporting some data points if we could get in.
yes, wait, so this whole deduction is based on actual data. Like
Hmm.
if like I will give some rough numbers. These may not be. I mean, these are broad numbers, so a little rough is okay for indicator purposes. But India में कोई 500, 550 million individuals would have a CIBIL score, right? Of those, about 240 to 250 million individuals would have an active loan at this point in time,
Hmm.
or at any point in time. Of those 240 to 50 million, about 80 million are women borrowers, microfinance, predominantly microfinance borrowers. And which is a large data set, like 8 crore, borrower accounts is not a small number at all. It is about almost 30% of the entire Indian market by number of borrowers, let's say.
Hmm.
And this deduction that this borrower category is the best is basis this data point. If you look at
Hmm.
how much women borrow, what the repayment rates are, women are better borrowers, which is also why women have higher CIBIL scores than men in India.
Right.
In spite of the fact that most men, like men, typically end up earning more
Hmm.
incomes,
Hmm.
women still have higher CIBIL scores than men in India, which is predominantly based on the fact that the repayment rates are very solid.
Hmm. Right.
Globally, it's the other way around. Men typically have higher credit scores than women globally, but it's India's unique, or not just India, but like some other countries also. It's still a unique thing.
Oh, nice. That's good to know. And while analyzing this whole value proposition, मेरा मतलब I am an economics student. मेरे को एक चीज़ याद आ रही थी अपनी एक डेवलपमेंट इकोनॉमिक्स की क्लास से जो मैं कोरिलेट करने की कोशिश कर रहा था. मतलब if I see as an investor, the value proposition that India P2P is giving is amazing. That I am getting a 16% interest rate, yeah, up to 16% interest. with the minimal risk that are obviously associated with peer-to-peer lending, but I think are the least in the asset class that we are talking about. तो मेरा एक नेचुरल इंस्टिंक्ट ये सोचने का था कि देयर इज अ प्रॉब्लम कॉल्ड एडवर्स सिलेक्शन, कि जब आप एक एक्स अमाउंट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट जब एक इन्वेस्टर को, जैसे मेरे को फॉर एग्जांपल प्रॉमिस हो रहा है, तो डेफिनेटली देयर विल बी अ क्रेडिट स्प्रेड जो इंडिया P2P मेक कर रहा है फॉर द ऑब्वियस रनिंग फंक्शंस ऑफ इट, फॉर द प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी ऑफ इट. सो व्हेन द इंटरेस्ट रेट दैट इज ऑफर्ड टू द एंड बोरोवर, जैसे वो थोड़ा ज़्यादा होता रहता है, तो वो जो अच्छे बोरोवर्स होते हैं मार्केट में से उनको ड्राइव आउट कर देता है,
Right.
एंड दैट इवेंचुअली क्रिएट्स अ विशियस सर्कल ऑफ राइजिंग इंटरेस्ट रेट्स एंड बैड बोरोवर्स. एंड इस पे आपने थोड़ी सी बात करी है कि आप ये कैसे प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व कर रहे हो बाय क्रिएटिंग कोऑपरेटिव्स, बट आई वुड लव टू हियर सम मोर say arguments on
Right.
how you're tackling this adverse selection problem while giving investors a very good interest.
Yes, okay. So the adverse selection problem exists in all, and that's a very good point that you raised. The problem of adverse selection exists in all lending businesses, especially those who are pressured to grow a lot.
Right.
अगर आपके पास बहुत ज़्यादा growth pressure होता है, you will end up, just diluting some of your credit criteria and thereabouts. Peer-to-peer lending, I would say, has a lesser problem of adverse selection for the simple reason that it tends to give out loans to smaller ticket loans on the other side. What happens in the Indian economy, or I mean, globally also, it's not very different. That loans, let's say आप जैसे हम microfinance borrowers की बात कर रहे थे, they have a CIBIL score. Why should a bank not be lending to them directly? I mean, you have a, let's say, many microfinance, even in our case, there are so many borrowers who have an 800 plus score. Why should India P2P be lending to them and not a bank altogether? 800 का हम 800 वाले बहुत कम लोग होते हैं इकोनॉमी में, मतलब इंडिया में.
Exactly. Exactly.
The reason is that these borrowers are taking smaller loans because they also don't have the capacity to repay larger loans. They're taking, let's say, 1 lakh rupee tak ka loan. Now, for a bank to underwrite and process a 1 lakh rupee loan is a very, like, वो 5-6 हज़ार रुपए तो शायद processing cost या 8,000 रुपए लग जाएंगे. I mean, rough estimates, of course.
Hmm.
So they do not like to give out these smaller ticket loans directly. So what banks
Got
or
it.
lending institutions typically do is that they will, get money through deposits or whichever other way, and they will give it to another NBFC further on, which is typically
Hmm.
also a large NBFC, which will further give on capital to a smaller NBFC, which will lend to the borrower.
Hmm.
Now, every time capital passes from one institution to another, आपका 3-4-5% interest वहीं पे चला जाता है. So if the borrower is paying 20%, roughly
Hmm.
about 6-7% is just lost to capital bulk breaking.
Hmm.
Peer-to-peer lending is very interesting because it bypasses these bulk breakers. So these high returns that are coming for investors are not coming because we are chasing high risk borrowers, it's because we are disintermediating. But by
Hmm.
doing this disintermediating, we are taking away the cushion that a bank offers in terms of fixed returns. So which is why it's up to 16%, and we cannot, अगर
Yes.
दूसरे एंड पे डिफॉल्ट होता है तो वो इन्वेस्टर का लॉस होगा. That's how it is. But the high returns are fundamentally not coming from chasing high risk. In fact, peer-to-peer platforms in most cases are able to reduce the interest cost for the borrowers because you unlock so much of this, intermediary spread in between.
Hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense.
But it is not like the high return FD that sometimes people think it's a high return FD, and it is absolutely not. It is a product which does carry some risk.
Right. Understood. And specific to your platform, how do you match an investor with a borrower?
So what we do, Preet, is that we take, like, we categorize borrowers in certain risk buckets, and we ask the investor कि आप किस risk bucket में invest करना चाहते हैं, which depends on the CIBIL score and a bunch of other things about the borrower. But fundamentally, we present to lenders who come or investors who come on the platform a diversified pool of, not pool, but a diversified portfolio of loans. Pool is not the right word, portfolio is the right word. तो अगर आप 5-10 हज़ार रुपये छोटा इन्वेस्टमेंट भी करते हैं, वी enable you to diversify that investment across multiple geographies, across multiple business types of the borrowers. So there is no concentration of your capital across, let's say, only Tamil Nadu or only Rajasthan or thereabouts, and no concentration of capital only to kirana store owners or
Hmm.
any other service. So, eight such parameters to granularly de risk, which is quite, once the system is built out, there is no cost to breaking an investment into small bits and reconstituting it, which is the kind of one of the great advantages of having a tech platform in between.
Right. Makes sense. So that's a really innovative approach to it. I don't know how many more people or how many more players in the market are doing that, specifically what you're doing, but yeah, seems very interesting to me, even if I, like to think about it as an investment proposition also. So yeah, kudos to that.
Yeah.
Yes. And following up on this, I was wondering, since you've worked a lot in the rural space with rural women, and you've also seen the urban side of things. So when we talk about this whole concept of financial inclusion that you at India P2P are trying to, improve the situation, how different are the financial inclusivity barriers or biases, so to say, when we talk about a rural setup versus an urban setup?
So I would say that some of the biases that women face are quite the same. I can give you a personal example. Some 4.5 years ago, I don't remember exactly when, I applied for a home loan,
Hmm.
and for a kind of inexpensive house, but I applied for a home loan. And it was the interest rate was decided, everything was done, and towards the end, this my relationship manager at the bank says that एक ये paper लगेगा. That paper was a no objection certificate from a husband. Like I said, I don't have a husband. I didn't even think about it.
Hmm.
And then they said, okay, please get it from your father. A no objection certificate. Okay. Um, because even though I had, like, I have some little bit of recognition, at least as a business person, I had that.
Right.
Even then, the bank was still, pushing this process on me, saying that they would want like a male family member's no objection certificate for my taking this loan. And this happens for smaller loans also in the when you go down the kind of ticket size value chain. For small loans, also, women are kind of forced to get an NOC, which is just giving undue power to your spouse or some family member who may not be involved in. Like I have a very good relationship with my father, but let's say हमारी कुछ लड़ाई वड़ाई हुई होती है, वो मेरा home loan रुकवा देते हैं. Why should that be the case at all? And those biases are very common. Like most women are, like even today, we get calls from some investors on the platform who are genuinely curious. I mean, they're not shocked or surprised, but they're just curious that how are we finding so many women business owners? Because like the perception we have is that women sit at home, fight with their mother-in-law, keep doing that drama. But that is like that seems that has been fed to us as the standard. It is not the standard at all.
Hmm.
So the biases are very much there. In fact, there is a very recent study by Oliver Wyman which says
Hmm.
that if lending institutions and banks just start offering the same services that they offer to men to women, they'll
Hmm.
unlock some $700 billion in additional revenues every year
Wow.
by doing nothing, by spending zero money, by changing their systems exactly zero, but just by offering uh, like equality in offering services. Women will take up those services, whether they're wealth management, suites, or loans, or thereabouts, and unlock so much more value. But for some reason, it's happening, but it's not happening fast enough.
Does it have a rationale to stem with the patriarchal situation of the society since the start? And why is it like still the how do you see the progress as? Is it going at a good pace?
So what I would say is that this is a little bit counterintuitive, but
Hmm.
when you speak to bankers and a bunch of other individuals who are in who are kind of still enabling these biases to happen, they are not biased individuals. They are not patriarchal individuals at all.
Mm.
I would say that because of greater awareness, most men, especially younger men, are very understand these that change needs to happen, and they're actually supportive of it. So everybody, by and large, is nobody says that patriarchy is a good thing. वो तो कोई नहीं बोल रहा, fortunately. So people are supportive towards fighting patriarchy, but somehow with these larger institutions, these changes are hard to come by. Changes are hard to make. And I think that's what slows it down. But as far as changing, there is no need to change people's minds. People's minds, I would say, by and large, are very understanding that, obviously there should be no bias.
Right, right. Makes a lot of sense. And delving into a similar analogy, like the problem you're solving is for rural women and bridging the credit gap. I was since I'm very intrigued about the startup world and क्या startups आजकल आ रहे हैं या क्या चल रहा है कौन सा फंडिंग का राउंड रेज हो रहा है अभी फंडिंग विंटर चल रहा है तो क्या चल रहा है क्या नहीं चल रहा है तो मैं एक इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में सोच रहा था इंडिया P2P के कॉन्टेक्स्ट से एक अगर हम थोड़ा सिमिलर इंसाइट लेके आए कि when we talk about money and its dispersal to women in context with the entrepreneurial scenario तो कुछ रिपोर्ट्स डेफिनेटली ये भी प्रोमिनेंट हैं कि व्हेन यूर अ वुमेन एंटरप्रेन्योर तो जो फंडिंग जो आनी चाहिए वो उसके अंदर भी एक बायस आ जाता है कि वुमेन एंटरप्रेन्योर्स आर सो टू से गिवन या have difficult access to funding. So I would love to understand your opinion on that, and in context with the statement that you also made in the Microsoft for Startups video, that when we talk about a woman entrepreneur, people like to over-index the women part of it, and try and forget about the entrepreneurial aspect.
Supreet, I'll answer the second part first. So this term woman entrepreneur is kind of in a way, well, it well, अगर कुछ describe करना है तो it's an accurate term, agreed. But it is actually detrimental to a lot of entrepreneurs out there who happen to be women. Like if I go into some kind of a session or an event, if it's women, if I'm introduced as a woman entrepreneur, then people will start asking me, oh, how is it being a woman in the startup space?
Hmm.
Well, I would like to share that in another forum, maybe like this one. But if I'm there, I want to talk about and promote my business. आपने मुझे टाइम ही नहीं दिया वो उसके बारे में बोलने का. आप बस यही मैं आप मेरे से यही पूछे जा रहे हैं. I'm not able to talk about my business at all. So it's actually detrimental. The other thing that I is a bit of slightly controversial to say, but I'm going to say it nonetheless. Like a lot of well-intentioned folks would try to run mentoring programs for women entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
Abhi, I would say that in our kinds of like in India, if a woman has become an entrepreneur, she has overcome a whole bunch of barriers and is already quite kick-ass if she's at this level. She's very like emotionally and intellectually kick-ass कि वो वहां तक पहुंची है. आपको
Hmm.
उसको मेंटर करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. The problem is that capital doesn't flow to women entrepreneurs as easily because there are biases in the minds of people who control those capital pipelines. So you should be doing mentoring and kind of de-biasing programs for people who do funding, who control capital, men and women both, not just men and women both, as opposed to spending effort trying to mentor women. It's not as fruitful. Personally, I have raised capital. I've raised capital for now multiple ventures. So I wouldn't say that it's not like it's super hard, at least in my personal experience. But I have seen that like I often get this comment that you should be more aggressive, come across as more ambitious. Like so basically you want me to talk like a bro. I am not going to do that. I'm not. I am very ambitious. I come with some credibility to kind of substantiate that ambition as well. I'm not going to start talking like a man just to make you feel more comfortable कि आपको ambition वैसे समझ आता है तो मैं आपको आदमी की तरह ambition बताऊँ. I'm not going to do that. But that is the expectation, which like I said, also needs to be corrected there. You should not ask an entrepreneur, a woman, to change herself so that she's understood better. You need to improve your understanding to see people in their, authentic light, which
Right.
is happening. It takes time.
Right. And in fact, आपने बात करी कि people expect you to be a certain way or speak a certain way or appear a certain way. I wanted to compliment you on your oratory skills, on the fact that you are there's always a subtle confidence. जो भी मैंने आपका वीडियो देखे या now I am now that I'm talking to you, there's a the words are flowing and it's sort of laid back also, but it's like on point on what you're trying to say. So I found that quality to be of a very effective conversationalist. Might not appear as a conversationalist या एक पर्सन का लोग एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं, पर मेरे को वो बहुत ही ऑन पॉइंट लगा और मैंने उसमें से कई पॉइंट्स लिए हैं। एंड इसके बारे में अगर हम बात करें तो एक इस एक्सपीरियंस से बीइंग एन एंटरप्रेन्योर आपको क्या लगता है, हाउ इम्पोर्टेंट इज द persona or the conversational capabilities of a entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I would say that you need somebody in the team uh, to have clear or kind of slightly inspiring communication about what you intend to do as an enterprise.
Hmm.
So I would not say that it depends, also depends a little bit on business to business. Like there are some very deep tech businesses where it's the, progress of the tech that does the talking. But in our kinds of businesses, I would not over index on just, storytelling or oratory as well, but it helps. It helps. It may not be the critical factor to define the success of an enterprise, but it helps. And I think overall for women, it doesn't help because we don't come across as we don't use enough hyperbole and those kinds of things. We're kind of more, a little more realistic in our claims,
Hmm.
so that sometimes doesn't help in capital raising, but I think it's better internally for teams when you kind of एक चीज तो बहुत जरूरी है, आपकी जो भी टीम है, इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट टू कीप शेयरिंग विद द टीम, लाइक एज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन समटाइम्स व्हेन दे बिकम मिड साइज्ड एंड लार्ज,
Hmm.
that that camaraderie goes down because you're not sharing enough. You don't have to have a lot of conversation, but you need to openly share what the wins are, what the losses are, what the future looks like. Some, it may be a little negative in the near term, but better going forwards. That's important, and I think that's where the skill helps, but I would still not rate it as a success defining skill still.
Regardless, you have the skill, and I, regardless of anything, wanted to
15 साल
compliment
से
you
कर
on
रही
that.
हूँ मैं ये. It's 15 years in the making, so it's not.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Actually, I'm. मतलब मैं in general when I'm listening to a speaker, no, coming from a debating background, I was someone जिसके oratory skills were like say a 2 out of 10, and going through that phase of understanding the art of conversation, if we can call that. So I tend to try to notice things about how someone is communicating and how effective is the message that they wanted to convey and not how they're trying to appeal to me. So that was one quality जो मैंने सीखी है कि important है, और वो मेरे को लगी कि जब आप बोल रहे थे तो मैं सुनना चाह रहा था कि आपका point क्या है. So I just wanted to communicate that कि despite you having 15 years of doing or experiencing that, फिर भी कई बार ऐसा होता है कि लोग बात तो कर रहे हैं लेकिन पॉइंट मिस कर देते हैं, चाहे जितना मर्जी अपीलिंग हो मुझे सुनने को. तो दैट वाज वन एस्पेक्ट जो मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा एज अ पर्सन हु loves to go into details of how an effective communicator is.
One of the things also is that a lot of life or the purpose of communication is not debating. I think हमारी कई स्कूल में भी हमें डिबेट में पार्टिसिपेट कराते हैं, and we kind of
Mm.
get into this for and against mode. But most business, and I think outside of business as well, it's about building consensus.
Right.
And I think consensus within teams, of course, startups are a little bit dictatorial. You decide and you just
Mm.
decide to pursue that even if some members might disagree. But consensus building is very important, and I think that as I mean, this is a bit of a segue. That is something that, as when we are younger, we should be taught better.
Right. So I hope that change comes through, and we are again making that point also in that in our discussion here. एक चीज जो मैं आपसे जानना चाहता था कि इतना आपने ऑन ग्राउंड जाके वर्क किया है, पहले आपको प्रॉब्लम फिगर आउट करने में, फिर इन जनरल द कंज्यूमर्स दैट यू आर देयर, सो यू आर इंटरेक्टिंग अ लॉट एज आई आल्सो सीन यू डू. So any stories that just struck out or any experiences that stand out through this journey कि आपको दिखा हो कि ये impact हमने create किया
So I would say कि so it's impact तो खैर I would say कि मेरे पर ही बहुत ज़्यादा हुआ है over the years. It's it you know, we tend to, like, when you think about our society or our country, we tend to ignore rural parts if you're not living in the rural parts, or if you don't have regular exposure there. So बहुत सारी कहानियाँ हैं, and I think मैं कोई एक there's not one story I would like to highlight, but
hmm.
I would definitely like to say that there is like this, like rural communities, and especially with like this whole self-help group network and all that we spoke about, and just kind of tying into the point, are consensus building networks in a way.
Hmm.
They thrive when individuals and everybody thrives, and that is a great thing to pick up and build up upon, is something that we've learned over the years.
Hmm.
कि आप कुछ अच्छा करने चाहते हैं तो लोग आपको सपोर्ट करते हैं. दिस इज समथिंग दैट आई हैव सीन टाइम एंड अगेन.
Hmm.
And I would have traveled to areas where it was risky to travel to, all of that, but I think people by and large have been just very positive, which is something you see a little less of in
Hmm.
like the typical commercial world.
Right.
And it's, yeah. कहानियाँ तो बहुत हैं, लाइक हम चूल्हा बेचने जाते थे, हमें लोग मिलते थे जो बोलते थे कि चूल्हे का धुआँ तो अच्छा होता है, बाइक का धुआँ खराब होता है. Things like that. There's like, simple things like that.
Hmm.
And but of course, with India P2P, it's very structured. India P2P works with already borrowers who've borrowed before, so we're typically their third or fourth loan,
Hmm.
and it's very structured, where there is a very strong expectation from rural women also that the service quality levels are very high. आप अगर कुछ डिसबर्समेंट डिले करते हैं, वो सब करते हैं, तो इट्स सीन एज दैट you're not performing up to the mark.
Hmm. Hmm.
So all those things are definitely there, but it's beautiful, and this is. I would encourage more businesses to kind of focus on both rural and women, because it's just a very, very, very um, supportive customer segment to work with.
Right. That's, I think, a very unique aspect of having that feeling from your somebody you're selling to, or the customers that you have. So that's great. Before we end, I was just looking at pondering through LinkedIn, and there was somebody made a post about how the current finance minister and the SEBI chairman are both women. SEBI chairperson rather are both women. So seeing that, and how do you think that really impacts on the ground level, seeing women in power, especially in the domain that we're talking about, especially in the finance space? And if you've seen certain benefits of that passing down to the ground level.
There are definitely many, many benefits of that. It is kind of just like say you walk into an office or a building, and if it's full of just men, a woman would feel out of place. But seeing enough women in leadership positions, or just holding a seat at the table, or just being in that building or that premises, gives you a lot of comfort and confidence both. And this lack of comfort is not a woman's fault. It is, because you sometimes feel unsafe in an environment, and why would I compromise on my safety to prove a point? You will not do that. So I think this is definitely a big, big positive, and it's and one needs to see more of it.
Right. I am super glad to have had this interaction and this discussion with you, Miss Neha. got a lot to learn, got a lot of insights on how credit is being dispersed and how we further need to go. If there are any parting words that you want to say to the audience.
Okay, then you put me on the stop. I don't have any parting words to say, but I would say that if and when you can, the audience can, you should at least go out and check out, aside from India P2P, how this whole Grameen Bank model or the microfinance movement works. It's one of those very few trust-based networks, trust-based economic networks that have succeeded at such scale, and there is just so much to learn and be inspired from. So, visit your nearest rural geography. Try and find out some women's group and go learn from them. You will learn a lot.
Absolutely, and you will discover a lot as you're
Yeah,
discovering
yeah,
with
yeah.
us today. And on that note, I think we'll end the conversation. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Hope you had a wonderful experience as well, jitna mera और hopefully Miss Neha ka raha hai. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much.